The kickoff clash was anything but a disappointment. It's safe to say that the league was awesome throughout its first month. Some things went as expected, and other things did not. Now that things have settled down, a rough perception of the food chain can finally be formed. As per tradition here on this channel, we gotta do a bit of a post-tournament power ranking. It gives us a good idea of where teams stand as the season progresses, and it's always fun to see how far teams travel up and down. In fact, that's something we will be keeping track of. In this instance, how far a team moves up or down will be in comparison to where I had them in my pre-season power rankings. Although, unlike how I usually do it around here, the primary bulk of this video is going to be based on regional rankings rather than overall. I want to try something different. Let me know what you think. I feel that APAC and North America personally are especially hard to compare this year until we see them playing each other. Although if you do want to see a brief rundown of what the overall rankings would look like, make sure to stay tuned until the end of this video. But for now, let's dive right into the APAC rankings, and starting us off at the number 7 slot is the Guangzhou Charge. I for one expected the Valiant to be the worst team early on, but it's clear the Charge are worse. They only took maps in 2 of their 6 games. I've said it a bunch of times recently, but the Charge have largely felt uninspiring when they play. They put up little to no fight, and they're just not fun to watch, and it often kind of feels like Choi is the only one seriously doing something. And I mean, their one win, it's against the Valiant. They really don't have much going for themselves. The Charge seem like a fairly easy win on the schedule currently, and I suspect they could do even worse moving forward. I genuinely do not know what they can do to make things better. They're doing so little right, and the APAC region in general is so tough to crack. I wish them luck. Coming in at number 6 will be the LA Valiant. Some might argue they deserve to be 5th, but I'm gonna hold off. I don't care what their map record was. 1-5 is still 1-5. They showed an inability to be clutch. But even so, I admit that the Valiant were still quite impressive for a 1-5 team. The fact that they managed to be so competitive is pretty eye-opening. I thought for sure this team was going to be garbage, but No Hill has worked extra hard to whip his roster into shape. They're a little rough around the edges, of course, but the skill is present. They tend to play around what they know, and I'd say that the likes of Dia looks more motivated than ever before. Just the fact that they played well against some of the top dogs in APAC shows that they could end up being a threat if they work on that execution a bit. Now that they have their first win, their confidence is going to be through the roof. I never thought I'd say this, but the Valiant are low-key scary. Occupying the 5 spot is the Chengdu Hunters. I know that they lost to the Valiant and all, but they still did win more games and had the higher map win percentage. And you can't get on me for that strength of schedule BS either. Everybody played the same opponents in APAC. That win against Philly in particular is something you might want to put some stock into, considering they made the tournament finals and all. You have to remember also that the Hunters are not nearly as loaded as they could have been this year. When you have to sit there and watch longtime teammates get dropped while listening to trade rumors about you as well, it can hurt your mental. When you're not in the greatest mental state and you're lacking versatility as a team, it's gonna be hard to win. Chengdu remains somewhat competitive through all of that though, and if the meta changes a little, or maybe they get into a better mental state, I believe this team could end up being a pain to deal with. But for now, this is where they stay. Number 4. The Hangzhou Spark. The Spark had a pretty solid qualifier. They've set themselves up for a pretty bright future early on, and when you think about it, they nearly went 6-0 during those qualifiers. They were quite competitive in those initial weeks. However, I don't think a lot of people are going to put ridiculous stock into them yet after seeing what they did in the tournament. Their rookies are wonderful, Shy still crazy, the teamwork looks pretty decent, but beneath the surface, we're all kind of questioning if the Spark are a true competitor. If you don't show up when it really matters, you're not going to be taken seriously. Number 3. The Shanghai Dragons. Not something I expected myself to say, but here we are. They lost to both opponents who went to the finals, and it's hard to justify putting them any higher because of this. And while it wasn't completely their fault, we do have to realize that Shanghai had a ton of close calls. What did they go to, like 5 map 5s? That's a lot for an early season championship favorite. Now, credit goes where it's due. The fact that Shanghai won almost all of them is absurd. We're talking a Shanghai team playing on unstable internet away from their normal location, and yet they still managed to be clutch time after time. Despite facing so many different things, they still went to the finals almost anyway. Like, that's how powerful they are. They were technically 1 map win away from probably getting swept by Philly. We won't get into that, but just imagine how Shanghai plays once they normalize. They'll be even more comfortable. But sadly, whether we like it or not, they have to be in 3rd place. They lost to Seoul and got swept by Philly twice. End of discussion. At number 2, you've got the Philadelphia Fusion. Ah yes, the infamous championship runner-ups. In spite of another silver medal, Philly fans can walk away from this, at least in my opinion, not totally depressed, as this new team, almost entirely made of rookies, made it so far in their first ever attempt. And consider how sick their new DPS players are. That DPS line is legit. If they can fix some issues with their timing and synergy as a roster, they're going to improve. But yeah, it should be noted that there are things they've got to work on. They aren't perfect. They went 3-3 in the qualifiers. The Fusion we got totally depended on the week. However, they did buckle down when it truly mattered. When the tournament rolled around, they did their job. They got 2 convincing wins to get all the way to the finals, and when they played the Dragons, they simply got them to bow down in fear. No other team in the APAC region was doing such a thing. It was incredible. Part of me feels like Philly should be rated lower for showing major inconsistency, but who do I realistically put over them? I don't feel amazing putting them here, but there's not much of a choice. They're clutch, the rookie showed star potential, and they made a tournament final. It's tough to go against them. And closing out APAC at the number 1 spot is the Seoul Dynasty. And after what they demonstrated in the tournament, there's really no other choice here. It's obvious. They literally beat all of the top teams consecutively in APAC in that tournament to pull off their win, and they looked so good while doing so. They were clutch, they were dominant at points, and they seemed determined. This Dynasty squad is a machine. They played some of the most clutch Overwatch we have seen in recent memory. Prophet basically had one of his classic out-of-body experiences. Man made it look like it was 2018 again. And in general, I'd say Seoul weren't super weak in any particular area. Their DPS are absurdly dominant. I mean, arguably the best in the entire league. And then you have people like Smurf and Vindame, who always seem to hold down the fort and find value. And with Ana being so powerful, creative is hard to stop as well. Seoul are a well-composed unit with unreal dive synergy, and if Prophet continues to play this way, it's hard to imagine this will change anytime soon. With how chaotic the APAC region is, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest really if Seoul do fall out of the number 1 spot after like 1 week, but for now, they definitely are the kings of the Eastern Conference. There's your APAC rankings in a nutshell. Funny enough, there weren't many seismic changes compared to my preseason rankings. In terms of who jumped or fell the most places, Shanghai were the only team to move multiple spots as they fell from my number 1 down to my number 3. This is the first time someone other than Shanghai cracks my number 1 spot in a very long time. As for another surprise, I'd say the Valiant not being in last is pretty interesting from a preseason point of view. I expected them to be terrible, but they definitely were not. That's about all I have to say in regards to the East, so let's move on to the West, and it starts off pretty obvious. The number 13 spot belongs to the Vancouver Titans. Them and Paris finished with the same map record, but it's pretty clear to most of us that Vancouver were the worst. I was hoping for more out of this group, but as harsh as it sounds, they stink. The eye test is all the evidence you need to know that this team was the worst in the entire Overwatch League. They kept forcing false onto Winston, and in general, their teamwork was not present. Some of the worst I've seen in recent memory. Their dives were extremely uncoordinated. Teammates were being left on an island far too often. There was no help. The Titans were poorly coached, and I'm hoping that them moving on from their original staff and onto DPay will do them some good, because if things keep going the way they are, they're not going to win a single game. Speaking of winless teams, the Paris Eternal occupy the 12 spot. While their play was certainly better than Vancouver's, that's really not saying much. Some people are going to credit Paris as being better than 12th after taking Houston 5 maps, and if you think that way, I don't blame you. That's a pretty fair argument to make. But for me personally, I don't really think that way. In my opinion, Houston were hardcore experimenting in the first half of that series where they went down 2-0. Literally the moment they started to play their normal stuff, that game wasn't that close. Think about it. That is the biggest accomplishment Paris has to their name so far. That's half of their map wins from that one series. They have so much to work on inside and out. Capitalize on stuff more as a team. That's what they've got to do. Hopefully that does come with time as the roster adjusts to a new head coach still and Wub being added to the roster. It would help Paris if they could find something that truly sticks for them as well, I'd say. When in doubt, try and be more like London. Go for comfort, then after build from there. Good luck, Paris. Transitioning to the number 11 spot is the alexyOWL, another largely uninspiring team so far. I really hope these are just some growing pains, because my god, a Yaki Flora DPS line with Kellen and Myungbong should be more than this. People either try too hard to be the hero, or the team isn't totally in sync. When your primary comp revolves around Winston, this is a problem. The individual carries are there, but in a team game like this, that just won't take you far enough. If they can fix the coordination and some of those mental lapses, they could be a bit nicer on paper. But even then, there's a clear problem at main support as well. It hurts my soul to say this, but the alexyOWL are just in rough shape no matter how you look at it. And so long as the meta stays this way and they don't make any roster changes, it's tough to see that changing. Number 10. The Boston Uprising. I have mixed feelings on Boston. They didn't do much to stand out. They had their one big moment, their big accomplishment of wrecking Washington, which was great, but they also nearly lost to the Titans. In other words, Boston showed up in flashes. They're in the process of figuring out what works for them still. They've been experimenting with lineups a lot, and they even went as far as to release Striker to try and improve their team. It's funny too. He was the biggest talent acquisition of the offseason for them, but they seem to be better off without him. Go figure. Due to a talent gap though, I really don't know how far Boston can go. The good news is, there's still a ton of time for them to improve and show us some better results. A new stage starting from scratch could be all that they need. Let's see what they've got. Next, we have the London Spitfire. Before London stands make a hate thread of them being too low on this list, let me explain. I don't believe that it would be right to put them any higher since they failed to make the tournament. But don't be mistaken, I still believe that London have been impressive so far. They stuck to their own unique composition and their guys thrived off of it. Hadi and Sparker have been true leaders and they've made the entire team have sky-high confidence. Beating Atlanta and pushing the Glads is no easy feat for an underdog. I tip my hat to them. They played a lot better than I ever could have imagined. I'm proud of this group for snagging 3 wins. Say what you want about their opponents, but they still got the job done. The fact that they're not bottom tier is really cool. But some of you need to chill, okay? The Spitfire looked pretty good, but don't get cocky. In my personal opinion, I think that they kind of caught the Rain and the Glads at a low point where their headspaces maybe weren't in the greatest place. I have doubts that we see the same results if they were to play again, but even so, London fans should be celebrating. Revel in this moment. 3-3 is pretty awesome for you guys, and a brighter future might have just arrived. Number 8. The Toronto Defiant. I don't know what to think of them yet. There's things I like, but there's things that worry me too. I love what their support line has done so far. It's practically superstar level. And also, I think that Finale has been rather consistent and a pretty good rookie overall. The Defiant have some stars to build around. But how much will it matter if they're potentially struggling internally? The whole Muse and Finale rumors were really weird for a while. They were solid contributors in the early weeks, but then they suddenly disappeared for a little while. There was rumors that they maybe wanted a trade, and then they had to play Hot Bundle though instead. But then all of a sudden we see KDG get released, which could explain why Finale and Muse disappeared for a while. Perhaps there was some disagreements between the two sides. That seems like the pretty obvious conclusion to come to. I'm going to try and stay positive here and assume that this move will end up benefiting Toronto from like a mental standpoint. Maybe Muse and Finale or whoever didn't like him will end up being more motivated to play harder and it'll just make the team look better as a final result. From what I can tell, some people do not have a lot of respect for KDG. All you need to do is see the reply that Logic's left after Toronto made the announcement. Pretty brutal stuff. But in terms of Defiant and what they could be this year, they're still easily in contention for like top 5 or 6 in the West, but they're still unproven as it currently stands, and just in general, the future feels uncertain. Improvement needs to come fast, otherwise I believe this team will be nothing more than a gatekeeper. Number 7. The Washington Justice. If I'm being honest with you, I didn't love what the Justice showed me. They were a roller coaster of emotions. On paper, the Justice seem like they're in their element in the current meta. Decay and Mag can be on their signature dive heroes, Happy can play Widowmaker, heck, even Krillin can do a decent job on Ana from what we've seen. But whenever you watch this team play, you notice a very obvious trend. If Decay and Happy get hot, it's like a guaranteed win, but for good teams that can simply overpower Washington, it's not going to get the job done. The Justice aren't garbage. In fact, when they're feeling it, or maybe when they have a good game plan going, they can push some good teams. Look at what they did against the Shock. But they're definitely not a threat, at least not yet. Their gameplay is one-dimensional. It's time for a change in approach. Otherwise, they'll be nothing more than middle of the pack. Number 6. The Florida Mayhem. They definitely weren't top tier, but Florida in general, I'd say, did very well. They were probably my favorite middle-of-the-pack team to watch. For a team full of random players, their teamwork was legit, and they certainly were not lacking in the playmaking department. Majed and the crazy DPS they had, they all looked very strong. I mean, Hydron even stood up to Happy for crying out loud. Then you have some nice stability in the form of Someone and Animo, who I think has played quite well. And I don't know if we'll ever consider Florida to be one of the top tier teams, but it's clear that they're not an easy win. Win or loss, they are going to make you earn it. If you just look down the list of results, many of their wins came in convincing fashion, and the losses always saw them take at least one map. And that says a lot considering they played Houston, Dallas, and the Atlanta Reign twice. I'm a fan of what I saw from Florida early on. They're a young team who could improve significantly in many aspects, and with Exy soon joining them in America, the future looks very bright for Florida. Number 5. The Houston Outlaws. Not a bad start at all for this crew. Matchup-wise, not having a Winston player technically put them at a disadvantage, but they found ways to work around it. Dante stepped in on the Doomfist to help out with the tank duties. You have Merritt, who filled in the shoes of Happy wonderfully, and Lastro, who honestly did pretty alright for a guy with no prior main support experience. The Outlaws are a step or two behind those top-level rosters, but they're still one of the most respectable teams in North America. Their record was decent, they got a tournament win, they upset Dallas in the first week, and they pushed the Shock relatively hard. That's a good start. I'm more than happy to give them the 5 slot for their efforts. Next up, we have the Atlanta Reign, and I can already see the hate comments now, but, ATP, the Reign beat the Shock, how can you put them lower, wah? Well, guess what? The Reign were mighty inconsistent throughout the entirety of the Kickoff clash, and the Shock generally played well. Sure, the Reign made top 4 this tournament, and they beat the Shock, but guess what? The Shock also finished top 4, so who really cares that much? It's very hard to commit to the Atlanta Reign. They got one upset against San Fran, which is cool, I give them credit, but in return, they faced multiple ugly losses, and they were kind of spread out, unlike the Shock, where it mostly just came in one week, where they maybe weren't prepared enough. Although, I'm not going to take what the Atlanta Reign did lightly. They came out and they defied expectations after a pretty horrible week right before. The Reign showed some powerful mental fortitude, and their bounce back game is evidently very strong. And their individual talent showed off some pretty good skill. If this Reign team can improve their flexibility, then they're going to be a dangerous team on a global scale. There's more than enough talent. But until they get that execution down, they're not cracking the top 3. Falling into my number 3 spot is the San Francisco Shock. Admittedly speaking, their tournament results were a letdown. The Justice nearly beating them in round 1 was kind of sad, and it was a struggle both during the Atlanta and Dallas matches. I also believe that they benefited from a somewhat easy schedule during the qualifiers. However, we cannot deny that the Shock are still off to a roaring start. For a team of rookies, they did a ton of great stuff. Their inexperience got the best of them this time, but a learning experience like this is only going to make them stronger, especially when your rookies play at such a high level, right? Proper and Finn were carrying on the regular. And at the end of the day, they still got top 4 in this tournament with an undefeated qualifier and a reverse sweep against the LA Gladiators. They very well could have just been in for a bad week. They showed us that they can hang in there with great teams. Maybe it was just the nerves. They have a big week coming up though, so I suppose we'll find out if they're legit very soon. Number 2. The Dallas Fuel. With how they played throughout the month, I'd say they were clearly the second best. Some might even say the best if we combine how they did in the qualifiers, but I don't think we can say that after watching them lose to the Gladiators on 2 different days during the tournament. But I mean, in general, Dallas did have an excellent showing. They lost to 2 teams throughout the Kickoff clash. That's it. And after the Outlaws game, they buckled down and went on a big win streak. Their Zarya comp looked absurdly hard to stop, so much to the point where it felt like Dallas were throwing if they subbed in Fearless. Think about that for a second. It felt like a throw to sub in Fearless Overwatch. Hanbin was playing at an MVP level, and his supporting cast did an incredible job. My only complaint is that Dallas did seem a little too reliant on that one specific composition. As good as it is, if you get figured out, what are you going to do? The Glad showed that firsthand, and now other top-level teams could mimic that same strat. If Dallas do end up increasing their flexibility and they get their dive comps back to where they used to be, then there's no doubt that they could win the mid-season tournament, especially because now they're not facing any disadvantages with not having a hit scan or anything like that. But unfortunately, right now, one team definitely steals the spotlight away from them in North America. And that team is none other than the Los Angeles Gladiators, who occupy your number 1 spot. A well-deserved location, by the way, and I'm not just saying that because they won the tournament. In general, the Glads never were in a situation where they were getting blown out. In fact, they were very close to winning every game convincingly, both before and during the tournament. This was almost a complete and utter stomping where they went undefeated. I mean, they were clearly the best team in that tournament, there's no doubt. Nobody could compete. Even the Dallas Fuel were at their mercy. The post-DPay era is off to a roaring start. Both FaZe and Unter have done an excellent job taking the reins. The Glads teamwork was masterful throughout the entirety of last weekend. Whenever there was a time to clutch up and step up in a big moment, one of their many stars would usually answer the call. The usual suspects have been unreal, but some other playmakers have joined in on the fun. Despite being a rookie tank, Reiner has assumed a real leadership role in the Glads, all while looking like one of the better tank players in NA. If that wasn't enough, Funny Astro, Ants, and Patty Pan have all been a seamless fit. Funny Astro just goes crazy on the Lucio and provides a very decisive playstyle. Then you have Ants, who provides dominance on payload-centric maps, and Patty has gotten more and more clutch as time has gone on. This team has been a blast to watch since they got the chokes out of their system. It won't be easy, but the Gladiators have a serious opportunity to establish a chokehold over the Overwatch League. The talent and flexibility are certainly there. It's just a matter of continuing this level of execution now. Congrats on this, Glads. Revel in this feeling. It's a great start to your year. And that gets you through my North American rankings, so let's have a look at the overview. In terms of who took a notable leap, Florida and London benefited greatly. The Mayhem and Spitfire both went up by a staggering 4 spots after greatly defying my expectations. Then you have Toronto, New York, and Paris who all dipped by multiple places. The changes in North America have been a lot more noteworthy than APAC. The top dogs all essentially stayed the same, but a lot of shifting went on after that top 5. APAC might have been unpredictable results-wise, but the West arguably saw more significant changes when it came to the pecking order. Now for a brief rundown of what my rankings would look like if we combined both regions. Of course, take this with a grain of salt, I'm just an idiot, I don't know any better, but the Glads and Seoul are going to be occupying spots 1 and 2. It's up to you on who you thought did better during the tournament, but I'm going with LA at the number 1 spot for putting on such a dominant display. In general, the top still looks relatively similar to what it was in the preseason, I guess. It's just that middle and bottom that are way different. The big winners of this month's overall rankings are the Valiant, Spitfire, Fusion, Spark, and Mayhem, who all jumped up 4+ spots compared to my preseason rankings. They all surpassed expectations in their own unique way, so the jump is well deserved. Your biggest losers in comparison to my preseason rankings, though, are the alexyOWL, Paris Eternal, Shanghai Dragons, and Chengdu Hunters. Shanghai mostly fell since they weren't totally dominant, and then all of the others basically just struggled a lot. And yeah, that's essentially where the power rankings currently stand for me after 1 month of play. I wonder how much they'll change by the end of July. Guess we'll find out soon enough. If you enjoyed today's video, hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel would be greatly appreciated, and feel free to leave your own power rankings down in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.